What you just heard was filmed June 12, 2023, in the Ozark Mountains of Missouri. These sounds echoed through the woods near Table Rock Lake, captured on a camper's phone at 2 a.m. That same night, other campers in the area reported hearing similar screams. The sounds carried for miles through the summer air, waking people from their sleep. Some grabbed their phones to record, others called family members, all of them trying to make sense of what they were hearing. Wildlife experts who've listened to this recording can't identify what made these sounds. The pitch and volume don't match any known animal in the Ozarks. But here's what makes this interesting. It's not the first time these screams have been heard in these mountains. For years, people around Table Rock Lake have reported strange sounds in the summer months, always at night, always when the air is still, and always leaving people with more questions than answers. Tonight, I'm sharing stories from the Ozarks, not just from that night in June, but from years of unexplained encounters in these woods. What's out there in those mountains? And why does it only make itself known in the darkness of summer? The first story comes from a house about 3 miles from where that video was taken. Around 11 p.m., Melissa, a mother of 3, heard something that made her blood run cold. She was awake, reading in bed, when she heard the first scream. It came from somewhere in the darkness beyond their property. Her first thought was maybe a mountain lion. They've heard those before out there, but this was different. The sound was the strangest she had ever heard, like a cry for help. It wasn't an animal sound, at least not any animal she knew. Her kids heard it too. All 3 of them came running into her room, terrified. The youngest, only 6, was crying. The sound seemed to fill their whole house, like it was coming from everywhere at once. For almost 10 minutes, these screams echoed through the valley. Sometimes they'd sound distant, then suddenly seem closer, like whatever was making them was moving, fast. Her oldest son swears he could hear something moving through the woods behind their house, but it was too dark to see anything. What really bothered her was how their animals reacted. They have 2 cats that spend most nights outside. Both of them were scratching at the back door, desperate to get in. She'd never seen them act like that before. Even after she let them in, they hid under the furniture, wouldn't come out until morning. The screams finally stopped around 11:15 p.m., but the silence that followed was almost worse. Usually, summer nights in the Ozarks are full of sound. Crickets, frogs, all kinds of creatures. That night, it felt unusually quiet, like every living thing was hiding. Her kids couldn't sleep. They all ended up in the living room, lights on, waiting for dawn. Nobody wanted to look out the windows. Nobody wanted to talk about what made those sounds. The next day, everything seemed normal, just another summer morning in the mountains. But something had changed. Her kids won't sleep with their windows open anymore. They don't play in the yard after sunset. And sometimes, on quiet nights, they can hear something moving in the woods. They never see anything, never find any tracks, but they know something's out there, waiting in the darkness. This next story comes from 2019. A police officer was working the night shift, patrolling the roads near Table Rock Lake, along Highway 265, where it runs between Branson and Shell Knob. What he heard that night made him rethink everything he knew about these mountains. It was mid-July, around 3 a.m. He was parked at the Indian Point Overlook, just past Silver Dollar City, completing paperwork from an earlier call. The windows were down. Typical summer night in the Ozarks, humid and still. That's when he heard it. At first, he thought it was someone in trouble, maybe a car accident victim. 15 years on the force, you develop instincts about sounds like that. But this was different. The scream came from the woods near Indian Creek, in that thick stretch of forest between the lake and the highway. It started low, then built into something that made him reach for his radio. But he stopped. What would he even report? For almost 12 minutes, these sounds echoed across the water. He'd worked these roads for years, dealt with every kind of wildlife call imaginable, knew what bears sounded like, what mountain lions sounded like. This wasn't anything natural. The weird part was his radio. Every time the scream started, his patrol car radio would fill with static. Not normal interference. This was different. Like something was disrupting all electronic equipment in the area. He called it in anyway. Dispatch sent 2 other units out from Kimberling City. By the time they arrived, the woods had gone completely silent. No wildlife sounds, no nothing. Just dead silence for miles. The 3 officers split up to cover more ground. One took the overlook area, another checked the boat launch, while he walked the tree line near where he'd heard the sounds. Their flashlight beams cut through the darkness, but the woods seemed to swallow the light. That's when things got stranger. All their radios started acting up at once. Not just static this time. The units would turn off and on by themselves. One officer's flashlight died. Brand new batteries. Just went completely dark. They kept searching for almost an hour. The whole time, that silence hung over everything. Anyone who spent time in these mountains knows they're never quiet, especially in summer. But that night, it was like nature itself was hiding. Around 4 a.m. they heard it again. Just once, fainter this time, coming from somewhere across the lake. Sounded like it was moving away, heading deeper into the forest. All 3 officers heard it. All 3 wrote it in their reports, but nobody could explain what it was. Next day, park rangers chalked it up to coyotes, maybe a bear, but he knows better. 15 years patrolling these roads, he's heard every animal in these mountains. What he heard that night, that wasn't anything natural. He won't talk much about it now. Says some things are better left alone. But he did tell me one thing. In all his years on the force, that was the only time he ever felt like he wasn't at the top of the food chain. This next story still bothers me. It's from a guy who lives up one of those gravel roads off Table Rock Lake, where the houses are so far apart, you can't see your neighbors through the trees. His daughter's graduation party ran late that night. Around midnight, the last guests were leaving when his dog started acting weird. Not barking, not growling, just staring into the woods, hackles raised. The dog, this big German shepherd that had killed 2 coyotes in their yard, backed up against the house, trembling. That's when they all heard it. This scream that made everyone freeze. One of the guests said it sounded like a woman crying, but distorted, like it was being played through broken speakers. Then it changed, dropped lower, into something that didn't sound human at all. The guy grabbed his rifle and spotlight. He's been hunting these woods for 30 years. Says he knows every animal sound in the Ozarks. But what he saw when he pointed that light into the trees, it was just standing there, not moving, not making a sound. Tall, way too tall. He said the weirdest part wasn't the size though. It was how it seemed to absorb his spotlight beam instead of reflecting it, like looking into a hole in the world. When it moved, it didn't step, more like it flowed between the trees. He swears the branches didn't move as it passed, like it was moving through them instead of past them. The air got thick, hard to breathe, and this smell rolled in, like ozone and rotting leaves. The security lights started going crazy, flicking on and off, but not in any pattern. The guy's truck alarm went off by itself. One guest's phone started playing static through its speakers, even though it was turned off. Then it screamed again, closer this time. The sound physically hurt, like pressure in their ears. The German shepherd, this dog that had never backed down from anything, ran inside and wedged itself under the kitchen table. The whole thing lasted maybe 30 seconds. But here's the detail that gets me. All 5 people at that party saw it. They all wrote down what they saw separately. All 5 descriptions match. Something over 7 feet tall, moving in ways nothing should move, seeming to bend around the trees instead of walking past them. They don't talk about it now. Don't get together anymore either. The guy's daughter moved to Springfield, won't visit at night. 2 of the guests sold their lakeside cabins that summer. The guy still lives there. Says he had to install metal shutters on his windows. Not to keep anything out, he says that wouldn't help anyway. But because he can't stand looking into those woods at night anymore. Says sometimes he sees that same darkness moving between the trees, like a piece of that night never left. Most of these stories come from people's homes or the deep woods, but this one's different. It happened at the Kimberling City Marina, right out in the open. The guy worked a late shift, handling the overnight dock maintenance. Been doing it for 6 years, checking boats, monitoring fuel lines, making sure nothing breaks loose in the night. Pretty routine job, usually quiet except for the summer party boats coming in late. Middle of June, around 1 a.m., he was checking the boat slips when the security lights around the Marina started flickering. Not all at once. They went out in sequence, like something was moving past each one. Started at the public launch and moved toward the private slips, one light at a time. He figured it was an electrical problem. They'd been having issues with the wiring all summer. The salt they put on the docks in winter plays hell with the electrical systems. He called it in to his supervisor, grabbed his tools, and headed out to check the breaker boxes. That's when he heard this sound coming from under the dock. Not like fish jumping or waves hitting the pillars. This was deeper, like something large moving through the water. Made the whole dock vibrate. The maintenance golf cart died halfway down the pier. Then his flashlight. Even his phone went dark. That's when he noticed how quiet it had gotten. No frogs, no bugs, nothing. Anyone who spent a summer night at Table Rock knows. That kind of silence isn't natural. The water was dead calm that night. No wind, no boats. Should have been clear as glass. But something was making ripples out by slip 23. Big ripples, moving against the current. He stood there watching, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Something surfaced about 30 feet out. At first, he thought it was a log. But logs don't move against the current, and they definitely don't stand up in the water. Whatever it was, it rose up until just its head and shoulders were above the surface. Even in the dark, he could tell it was massive. It stayed there perfectly still, like it was watching the dock. Then it made this sound, not like the screams people report from the woods. This was different, lower, like whale song, but wrong somehow. The kind of sound you feel in your chest more than hear. The water around it started to churn, but there was no wind. His ears popped like the air pressure had suddenly changed. All the moored boats started rocking, their cables creaking. Then it just sank, straight down. No splash, no ripples, nothing. Like the water just swallowed it. The lights came back on. His phone started working again. Everything went back to normal, except the water. For hours afterward, nothing would swim in that part of the lake. No fish, no turtles, nothing. Even after sunrise, the fish finders on the rental boats wouldn't work right around slip 23. Just showed static where the depth should be. He quit his job the next day. Works construction now, far from the water. Says he still can't explain what he saw that night. But one thing bothers him more than anything else. The lake is only 20 feet deep where he saw it. But whatever went down into that water, it kept going. They found his golf cart the next morning, parked right where it died. The battery was fine, everything checked out normal. But the metal frame was warped, like it had been exposed to intense heat. And the seat, soaked through, on a clear night with no rain. He won't go near Table Rock anymore. Says sometimes at night, he still hears that sound in his dreams. That deep, wrong song that made the water dance. This comes from an email I received. Working nights at a gas station, you see all kinds of strange things. But what happened last June still keeps me up at night. Most of these stories come from deep in the woods or up in the mountains. Mine happened right under the bright lights of a Shell station parking lot. It was around 3 a.m., middle of the week. Dead quiet except for the hum of the coolers. I was out front, bringing in the newspaper stands, when all the parking lot lights started dimming. Not flickering, dimming, like something was draining the power. The air got heavy. You know that feeling right before a big storm? Like that, but worse. Made it hard to breathe. Then this smell rolled in. Everyone talks about the ozone smell, but this was different. Like something burning, but cold, if that makes any sense. Our security cameras caught what happened next. 4 different angles, all digital, high def. But the footage doesn't show much, just static in these weird dark spots moving across the screen. I heard it first. This low sound, almost too deep to hear, more like pressure than noise, made my ears pop. Then all our coolers shut down at once. Every light in the store started going crazy. The air got so thick it felt like moving through water. That's when I saw it. Not in the woods, not in the shadows. Right there under the gas station canopy, standing by pump number 4. Had to be 9 feet tall. The way it moved, like it was trying to copy how people walk, but couldn't quite get it right. I hit the emergency shutoff for the pumps. Pure instinct. 6 years working gas stations. You learn to hit that button when things go wrong. But it didn't work. None of the buttons worked. The registers started cycling through numbers on their own. It stood there for maybe 30 seconds, not moving, just watching. Then everything electronic in the store went dead, completely dead. In the silence, I could hear it breathing, not like anything breathing I've ever heard before. When the power came back on a few minutes later, it was gone. The security footage showed nothing but static. But pump number 4, the metal was warped, like it had been in an intense heat, but only on one side. And the concrete underneath had these weird marks, like something heavy had been standing there. But the marks don't make any sense. They don't match any footprints I've ever seen. Corporate sent out maintenance crews the next day, replaced the pump, repaved that section of concrete, said it was routine maintenance. But they never explained why 3 different technicians quit after inspecting the damage. I still work there, still work nights. But now I do my restocking inside the store. And when the lights start dimming, I stay away from the windows. Some things aren't meant to be seen under fluorescent lights. And this last email I received is really strange. Here it is. Most people think these things only come out at night. That's what got me. This happened at 2 in the afternoon, 300 feet underground, during a regular tour. I've been guiding cave tours for 9 years. Same route, same jokes, same spots where you point out the formations. The cave stays a constant 58 degrees year-round. Nothing changes down there. At least that's what we tell the tourists. It was a Tuesday in June, middle of the afternoon. Small group, just a family of 4 and a couple on their honeymoon. We were in the cathedral room. It's this big open chamber about halfway through the tour. That's when our lights started failing. Now, we're used to power issues in caves. That's why we carry backup lights, why there's emergency lighting every 50 feet. But this was different. The lights weren't just going out. They were dimming, like something was pulling the power out of them. The air changed first, got thick, heavy. In a cave, you get used to the way air moves. There's always a flow, always a pattern. But this was wrong, like the air was being pushed by something. Then the temperature dropped, not like a normal cave draft. This was different. Went from 58 degrees to near freezing in seconds. Could see our breath in the emergency lights. That's when we heard it. Not from one of the tunnels, not from above, from inside the rock itself. This deep vibration, like something massive moving through the stone. The whole chamber started humming. The kids started crying. Their parents tried to keep calm, but everyone could feel it. Something was in there with us. Something that didn't belong in our world. The emergency lights went next. Complete darkness. But in that darkness, something was moving. Not echoes, not shadows. Something big. Could feel it passing by, brushing against us like a cold wind. But it wasn't wind. When the lights came back on 2 minutes later, everyone was exactly where they'd been standing. But the cave was different. The formations we'd passed 100 times had changed. Stalactites twisted in ways that would take thousands of years naturally. The limestone walls looked melted, like they'd been exposed to impossible heat. The rest of the tour, canceled. We got everyone out fast, said it was a power failure. But the technicians who came to check the electrical system, they couldn't explain why every battery, every backup generator, had been completely drained. The cave was closed for 2 weeks after that. They said it was for maintenance. But I saw the scientists they brought in, saw their equipment, saw their faces when they checked their readings. We still do tours through that chamber. Had to. It's part of the main route. But it's different now. Colder. The formations keep changing, little by little. And sometimes, when I'm doing the last tour of the day, I can feel something watching from deep in the rock.